Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the All Souls Community Forum, and coming to you from All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Kansas City. I'm Joe Robertson, a member of this church and a member of the Forum Committee, a forum that has for nearly 80 years sought out important conversations and promoting critical thinking on the most compelling and challenging issues of our day. Today, we welcome Kelsey Ryan, the founder and publisher of The Beacon. She comes to us from the front lines of nonprofit journalism. So we'll be talking about the imperiled state of local in-depth news and what it takes for a startup newsroom today to thrive. So good morning, Kelsey, and welcome.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks everyone for having me this morning. Just to give a little bit of background about myself before I dive into the organization that I founded a couple of years ago. My background is as a newspaper and investigative journalist. I'm originally from the Wichita area, but I've kind of spent my career going back and forth between Kansas and Missouri. And, started out at the Joplin Globe literally the day after the F5 tornado came through in 2011. That was the beginning of my professional career. And then worked at the Wichita Eagle for a number of years before coming to the Kansas City Star. At the Star, I was on the Pulitzer finalist team for a series that we did on government secrecy in Kansas, and then was laid off 5 months later. And so that was really the impetus for starting The Beacon, a local nonprofit news organization. And, really was kind of the kick in the rear that I needed to begin this journey, which was not one that I expected to go on just a few years ago. So some of you may be familiar with The Beacon, and if you are readers, we're very grateful, and if you aren't, hopefully we can help you learn a little bit more about us and see you along in this journey as well. One of the things that spurred the beginning of The Beacon was not just, oh, poor Kelsey, she needs a job, but really looking at a systemic crisis that's been going on in our country for over a decade, now, and that's local journalism in crisis. And I don't use the term crisis very lightly as a reporter. To me, that's a very serious word. But we are facing a crisis in local news and information, community information needs being met, and the way folks consume media. And, for those who can see the slide, you can see just a few examples of what kind of led to this crisis. But there's a whole lot of things that have kind of all hit the fan, if you will, at the same time that's led us to this place. I think we all saw it, regardless of your political persuasion, very acutely around the 2020 election, and a lot of misinformation and disinformation around that in particular. We're seeing it now with the war in Ukraine and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and a lot of disinformation. But specifically in the United States, several things have kind of led to this point where we're at. The entire model, basically, for the business model for journalism is largely tied to print newspapers, or was largely tied to print newspapers. And all of these things happened at the same time: the Great Recession, undercharging for online content, increased costs for print production, social media disruption, decrease in print subscriptions to help support the reporting and the journalism. And last but not least, the for-profit newspaper industry acting in the interest of shareholders and not the public. So these things all have kind of come together at the same time to create what is a large crisis in information in our society. And it's happening all over the United States, and it's happening in other parts of the world, but it's very acutely happening here in Kansas and Missouri. And we've had concentrated newspaper loss. Nearly more than 1,500 communities now have lost their news coverage across the United States. And it's not just, again, oh, poor journalists, they don't have jobs. It's really, what are the outcomes of those folks not doing this kind of work, and these communities not having this information? And that means, of course, that stories aren't being told, governments aren't being held accountable, people aren't being aware of issues, people don't know how to become civically engaged, and the list goes on. And of course, also we have studies now that show that a loss of local news specifically contributes to political polarization and distrust of our neighbors. And so in Kansas, we've also just seen, the consolidation, mass consolidation of newspapers, same in Missouri, mass consolidation of the ownership of newspapers, and then dwindling staff sizes, fewer people expected to cover more things. And often you have kind of an echo chamber with aggregation, folks who may be rewriting stories from other outlets and republishing without independently verifying facts, or just writing in order to get clicks and clickbait, as we've all seen. And that clickbait has largely perversed the journalism that you see. It incentivizes things that are more sexy or interesting for people to click on versus things that are necessarily more substantive. And that's all just to power an ad revenue based model on the internet. So it really does affect the type of journalism that journalists pursue when they have ad and click based models. But it's not all doom and gloom. That's something that I really like to let folks know is, while this crisis is happening, there's actually a lot of really exciting things happening in the nonprofit news ecosystem in particular. We're seeing hundreds of independent news outlets spring up across the United States. They're launching at a rate of at least one a month. There's actually now more than 360 members from the Institute for Nonprofit News. I'm a full disclosure, a member of the board of directors for the Institute for Nonprofit News, which is the national trade association group for these organizations. And we're seeing the emergence of journalist entrepreneurs across the United States, many of them former journalists in more traditional print legacy media like myself, who are exploring new business models that would not jeopardize the integrity of the news gathering operations. And so that's really exciting. We're having that growth across the industry. It's more collaborative. It's more, what can we learn from the Texas Tribune? And I'm going to call up the founder of Cal Matters and ask them how they approached this issue. Or this hurdle in building their news organization. And that's been the really exciting part is you see this kind of collective energy around building or rebuilding a news and information ecosystem and infrastructure across the United States right now. And so, the Beacon is part of that emergence. So, 2019, I was laid off in August of 2018 and spent a few months doing a lot of really heavy research and looking at other places, 990s, to get an idea of how much money it actually takes to do something like this, to start a nonprofit news organization. And then looking at, okay, what are the skill sets and things that we need? What are all of the things we need to do to create a nonprofit? Should we be nonprofit or for-profit? That was one of the very first questions. Quickly landed on nonprofit because of its ability to activate philanthropy, especially as a startup. And really talking to a lot of folks in the community about what was missing in Kansas City journalism. What are things that they wanted to see that they didn't see? How were they feeling about news? And this was 2019, of course, before the 2020 election, but a lot of folks described a lot of news fatigue is the phrase that we use in the industry, but they were describing how they felt that many would tune out instead of being subjected to lots of negative and horrible headlines. And a lot of folks felt that the news too often focused on just the problems and not the solutions or things that people were attempting to do to solve problems in the community. And so with that in mind, and using 2019 largely as a time for me to do a lot of fundraising, while working a separate full-time remote job, we came up with the goal of creating a sustainable, first and foremost, nonprofit news organization to engage the public. And really wanting to use this organization as something that could spur reform and have an impact in a way that's measured very differently than how newspapers have been measuring their impact for a while. So I can talk more about that here in a little bit, but that is something, having that mission and that core value from the beginning was really the idea, to create a civic news organization that could, essentially make positive change in a community. And so the last few years have been quite the whirlwind. What I joke with folks is that, a 5-year plan turned into a 2-year plan with a lot of philanthropic support and a lot of individual support from folks in the community. But, since launching early, the Kansas City Beacon originally started publishing by newsletter in March of 2020, right with the pandemic. We've really been focusing on how we can kind of help be part of this change in news and information ecosystem in Kansas City. And in 2021, we received some philanthropic support in Wichita that allowed us to create a second newsroom to become a nonprofit news network versus just an individual newsroom in one community. And so, that's something that organizationally we're working on. Our North Stars are, becoming sustainable and having, a sustainable business plan that's nimble and doesn't make the same mistakes that newspapers have made, but also making sure that we're centering the voices of folks in the community and really focusing on civic engagement as part of a pillar of our journalism. And you'll see this in a lot of the nonprofit news ecosystem, where folks have a lot of similarities in the business models they're pursuing, and it's not reinventing the wheel at this point. We have, folks who've been around for 10 plus years who have been doing this kind of business model. And we've also been able to kind of hone in on the types of reporting that we do. At the Beacon, we say we're not a breaking news organization. That's, we make that really abundantly clear to folks. And we ask the community, what kinds of news and information, what topics, for example, do you most want to know about? And we, we've landed on government coverage, not politics, government. Those are very different types of reporting. The environment is something that's really important to people. Obviously, healthcare in the last couple of years, we've seen the importance of having strong healthcare coverage, and not just in the pandemic, but all of the time. And then education and economic coverage. And economics for us at the Beacon includes things like housing, includes things like labor, and also infrastructure largely, because those are things that affect our day-to-day lives. And all of these things have kind of an underlying civic engagement focus for us. I talked a little bit ago about how we define impact, and one thing that I want to share with folks, and I can't speak to how it is currently, but when I was still in newspapers, and individual reporters were given page view goals, and that was kind of this requirement for us to try to hit these page view goals. I believe mine was like 1 million page views, even as an investigative reporter, spending a lot of time doing records requests and digging and not doing breaking news. And so at the Beacon, we've talked a lot with our peers in other newsrooms across the country, but also internally about how we want to define our impact. And while we, of course, look at things like page views, and we look at, how many folks are signed up for our newsletter and things like that, we want to reach lots of audiences. We also have really thought deeply and holistically about how we define our impact as journalists. And for us, that means going beyond clicks and looking at whether or not the journalism actually made a difference, if publishing a story led to change. And of course, some other things that we look at, but not place as high of an importance on, are if we win an award, if we get to go and talk to folks like you all in the community about what we're doing, when folks give us feedback on our journalism that says that this was helpful to them, or that it helped them do something in the community or become more engaged, or helps them know how to attend a city council meeting, or how to get a hold of their legislator. Those are things that we look at as real impact, because it means that we're meeting community information needs. And this is a real shift from a for-profit media impact definition. We're seeing this more holistic both qualitative and quantitative way of measuring impact, that really differs from the traditional quote unquote metrics of news gathering. Just a few examples that I can pull from the Beacon, and I'm actually working on our impact report right now for the last 2 years that goes more into depth here. But we know that folks, because of our coverage, told us that they registered as poll workers in the 2020 election. We know that counties updated the security of their election websites because of our stories about them only using HTTP instead of HTTPS. We recently did a series of stories investigating the Kansas City Land Bank, and the chair of that was ousted, and now the city auditor is specifically looking into conflicts of interest. So those are just a few examples of stories that led to direct change here in this community, and to us that is the highest measure of impact. And of course, you can't have impact if you don't have eyeballs. So I'm not saying that page views aren't, in some way useful to us. But we really try to make sure that our reporting is available to folks in many ways. And this is something that, especially as a digital publication, we don't have a regular distributed print product. We're hyper aware of the digital divide and the fact that not everyone has access to the internet. So that's something that we're really thinking about, and a lot of the other nonprofit digital only publications are thinking about. Right now, we have twice weekly email newsletters. Of course, we use social media. We have websites that don't assault your eyes with pop-ups and ads. And we also very diligently work with other media. So, we're part of the Kansas City Media Collective, and we have a Steal Our Stories policy where folks can republish any of our stories for free. They just need to give us some credit for it. And then we also work very closely with archival systems, things like LexisNexis and others, who really have expressed to us concerns because there's so much less information on the local level for them to include in their library and academic research databases than there used to be. So they're very keen to work with a lot of the nonprofit newsrooms. And we've experimented with some niche print products as well. We did we did voter guides, nonpartisan voter guides back in 2020, where we partnered with other nonprofits to distribute them. We researched how to vote safely in the pandemic. It was really about process, not who to vote for, but about the process of voting and being able to actually reach people where they're at. So we partnered with other nonprofits and specifically targeted zip codes with low voter turnout, and then translated and designed those guides in 5 languages to be distributed. So we have done some print materials, and we've also experimented with text messaging campaigns, specifically around the racial justice protests of 2020 and also the election that year. And so that's something that we're interested in exploring more of, and creating more of a dialogue with folks through text messaging, particularly with folks who might not have regular internet access. So there's a lot of different ways that a modern and digital only nonprofit news organization can reach audiences today that goes beyond, the throwing a newspaper at everyone's driveway at 6 in the morning. And I mentioned before, this was kind of a 5-year plan that's turned into a 2-year plan. But one thing that we're acutely aware of here is the disparate geography of the Midwest, right? Like we've had like large rural and urban divides, and we know that from a business model perspective and an information model, like we need to try to figure out how we can be useful to folks in many different communities of different sizes. So the Beacon, has newsrooms in Kansas City and Wichita, which are major metros. But one thing that we're really looking at in the future is how we can scale. And when I say scale, it doesn't just mean go to bigger communities. It also means how can we meet needs of mid-sized communities as well. So we actually are in the process right now of adding state house reporters that are going to serve both newsrooms. But then we're also looking at how we can expand into different communities that have a need. So we're talking to folks in those communities to figure out what their need is and how we might be able to help fill that in a way that's equitable and also meets their needs, but also is in a way that folks in their community want to read their news. And that is a really important thing. You know, we have a growing team. We have folks who we've largely been trying to recruit from the Midwest, which is really important to me personally, that we have a really you know, diverse group of folks on our team, and that we're able, you know, to have folks from here report about issues here, places that they know, communities that they know. And, you know, we're growing the support staff for these newsrooms as well. We actually just last week, and we'll be announcing this actually in our upcoming newsletter, we've added an executive director to be a co-leader with me in the organization, and Mike Matson, who's formerly worked with the Kansas Farm Bureau and the Kansas Leadership Center, is our new executive director. And he's really going to be taking the reins on a lot of the development and the business side of things. And that'll allow me to refocus more on the editorial side of things, which I'm really excited to be able to do after a couple of years. So that's something that we're trying to really do, is, you know, rebuild a news infrastructure that's really true to our communities. And of course, you know, these things aren't done for free. We have to support our staff. We want to make sure that pay is equitable. And a lot of folks in the nonprofit news ecosystem are really trying to work on solving the business problem, right? The business model problem that you know, newspapers thought they would be the top kings forever in this area. And we're trying to look at, how do we diversify revenue, right? What are the different ways that communities can support nonprofit news with varying degrees of you know, amounts, like everyone who can pay from $5 a month to large philanthropic donors, but then balancing all of this with the need for editorial independence, and to not let the money dictate the coverage, but to continue to let the audience you know, help guide us on coverage. And so there's lots of different ways to do it. And that's a really exciting part of what we're all trying to collectively do across the country, is to, you know, figure out what that right mix is, what the mix is maybe for different communities, and then to experiment and to try new ways of bringing in revenue, again, while not, you know, sacrificing the integrity of the news gathering. So one of the things that I'm really excited to share with you all today, that we haven't done a whole lot of public announcement about, is something that we're working on that's going to kind of radically change our news gathering here in Kansas City. You know, I've mentioned before how we did, you know, maybe a lot of discussions with the community. We've done community listening sessions. We do surveys with folks. We have a community advisory board that meets quarterly, that advises us directly on our journalism. And we've, you know, really been working with folks to, you know, when we get emails, we try to respond to every single email. We really do. Like we try to respond to anyone who reaches out to us. But what we're getting ready to launch, both in Wichita and Kansas City, are something that we're calling community engagement bureaus that are actually embedded within our newsroom. And the idea behind this is that we want to make sure that we're not just giving lip service to saying that we actually are listening to the community. We want to prove it, and we want to make it part of our everyday news gathering process. So of course, as journalists, we're still going to, you know, use our professional judgment on stories, and you know work through them and have the same ethical guidelines and boundaries that we've always had. But we want more community feedback. We want to avoid being siloed like a lot of traditional newspaper reporters have been through, you know, especially as they've been pressured to write more and more stories and not get out in the community as much. So we want to avoid that, and we really want to have engagement bureaus be at the center of our editorial and news gathering processes. This is also, that's something that's really important to us, is trust building, right? Making sure that the journalism that we produce is accountable to the communities that we actually serve. And so, you know, what we're trying to do is, you know, build these engagement bureaus. Wichita is a little bit further along than Kansas City is in its process, but you're going to see more about this very soon up here in Kansas City. But right now, and I'll give Wichita as kind of a roadmap first. We've hired a community engagement bureau manager and community journalist who opened up applications and is also doing recruitment for what we're calling community representatives. And these are folks from diverse stakeholder groups across Wichita and eventually across Kansas City, you know, who maybe feel that they've been disillusioned by local news, or that their communities have not been accurately represented in local news. And what we're doing is getting a group of folks together to be these community representatives. We're paying them for their time. We want this to be equitable and available to people of all different backgrounds. And then working really closely with them to identify the stories that have gone untold and the sources that need to be developed within those communities. And so those folks, our first group of community representatives are going to be announced in Wichita later this month. And I can just tell you it's an all-star lineup of folks. And what I was most pleased about was I only knew 2 of the 10 people. And I'm from the Wichita area, you know, pretty well sourced, and I only knew two of the 10 names on there. And that's what we want. We want to get folks that we don't know. We don't want the usual suspects. We want people who come from communities that have been ignored or even actively harmed by other media, and integrating their feedback into our daily editorial process and determining what kind of news we actually produce. So this is a really exciting thing. We'll also, of course, continue to have community advisory boards. That'll be in Wichita and here in Kansas City. We're recruiting right now for our Kansas City Community Advisory Board. So if that's something you are interested in or know someone who is, please let us know. But I think that this is really a model that's going to help change the way news organizations become more integral to their communities and help build trust. And you know, we're going to be documenting our process here, what we learn and what works and what doesn't work, and we want to share that really widely with the other nonprofit news organizations, so that if other people want to try to replicate this model, they can. And like I mentioned before, you know, these are community representatives who are paid. They're holding us accountable to our journalism, and then we are going to actively track what ideas come from the Community Engagement Bureau that actually become stories that we publish and things that we promote. And so that way we can hold ourselves accountable, and they can hold us accountable. And, you know, this is an interesting time because, you know, most news organizations don't invite the community to be so actively involved in their process. And, you know, a lot of folks don't know that as journalists, we have ethics and boundaries and things that we uphold. And, you know, this is just something that's really important to us. And we want to help folks in the community better understand how we do things and why we do things, but also be open to, you know, bring them along as part of that process. And so this is just, you know, here, if you can see the slides, some examples of some of the things that as journalists, we at the Beacon subscribe to. You know, might be a little bit different for other places. I know some other news organizations say that they won't take things from sources that exceed $20 or whatever. We keep the bar pretty high with $5. So, you know, we have a code of ethics. We don't take things from sources. You know, we don't display yard signs or financially support political candidates. We disclose our conflicts of interest, and we, you know, put our name onto our work. You know, we don't hide behind anonymity. So these are all things that are really important to us. And as we build out these community engagement bureaus, you know, our hope is that we can, you know, share some of these ethics with the community, and folks can understand how journalism works. We want to demystify this process, and, you know, make sure that people understand where we're coming from, and we can understand where they're coming from a little bit better. These conversations that just really haven't been happening in a lot of traditional newsrooms. I'll add also with the community engagement bureaus, you know, we have a very white, middle class and male media across the United States. Like it very much skews into those demographics. One of our goals with the community engagement bureaus is to help diversify the folks who choose to pursue careers in journalism. And at the Beacon and a lot of other nonprofit news organizations, we have internship programs and things like that, you know, we work really closely with J schools like the University of Missouri and KU and others. But there's a lot of folks who have very non-traditional skill sets or backgrounds, or have never been exposed to journalism, but would be really, really, really good journalists. And we want to find those folks, connect with them, and maybe, you know, if they're through the Community Engagement Bureau, they eventually become community journalists. I'm of the mindset that you don't have to go to J school to be a journalist. that, this is a vocation and a calling, not just a profession. I don't think journalism is a capital J kind of, profession. It can be a lowercase j, and that's good. It's just as good or better. So, that's something that we're really keen to do, is to help change not only the way we do journalism, but who participates in this process, and who, is able to be, be a journalist. And so that's something that we're really working on at the Beacon. And I'm really excited to share that with you all. We really haven't talked publicly about the engagement bureaus all that much. So you're getting a bit of a sneak peek into what's to come over the next 6 months as our organization grows. So I know I've given a lot of information about community journalism and nonprofit journalism. And, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about this process. I kind of consider myself an open book. I'm probably a little too transparent, if that's a thing. But, I really appreciate you all coming today, and hope that this kind of helps shine a light, at least for you all, on some of the ways that journalists are thinking about, redefining this industry, and changing the way that this works, to make it more equitable and accessible to folks, and to make it more relevant, frankly, than what has kind of happened with some news organizations in the past. So happy to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. We were listening to Kelsey Ryan, the founder and publisher of the Beacon in Kansas City, and now also in Wichita, hoping to expand. And then I'll tell you that next week, we will have Corey Wallace from Della Lamb Community Services, and she will be telling stories of African refugees in Kansas City, how we're supporting them, and what it tells us about the strength of our community. And our first question comes from Carol.
So, put my picture up. I'm wondering, I mean, it just sounds so exciting. But I'm wondering if there's any chance that your community outreach sort of approach, if I can use that vague sort of term, means that you will also be able to emphasize less on big, scandalous, negative sensation than newspapers have often got their notoriety, popularity, whatever sales from. And maybe in the end, improve our democracy and our faith in it, or vice versa. Our faith, yeah. Anyway, so do you see that connected at all?
Yeah, I definitely do. I was actually a political science major, not a journalism major, and so to me, journalism and a free press is a foundational pillar of our democracy, right? And we're seeing that. I think. To draw some really direct conclusions happening in the Ukraine right now, with independent journalists on the ground who are giving us real-time information, specifically on social media, about what's happening in their country, while there's a lot of disinformation being spread by Russia right now in particular. So yes, I think the answer is yes. We hope that folks become more civically engaged and participate in this thing called democracy that we have here, by being informed about what's happening in the community. And a lot of times we're more directly affected by what's going on locally than what's happening in our government nationally. Like, not all the time, right? Like, sometimes there are national things that really affect our day-to-day lives. But in the United States, like, local government has such an impact on our day-to-day lives, and state government as well. And so, our hope is to help demystify a lot of what government does, but also give folks those keys on how to engage with it, how to become active participants. And that's just really important to me. There's a lot of things that as journalists we kind of take for granted, like how to do record requests or open meetings laws. And we think that a lot of folks need to have that information, and in more layman's terms than what's often available from the government. So those are some things that we're really excited to be able to work on with the input of folks in the community about what they're looking for. So I think.
Thank you.
Question.
All right, Michael.
Yes, great presentation, and what you're doing is just so phenomenally important to the civic life of our city. So, wish you all the success. And in that vein, of course, the economic challenge is a major one, and you've addressed that. Your devotion to various forms of fundraising. What I haven't heard you talk about, and what we had actually fairly recently at the forum, another speaker talk about the need for public funding for local news coverage. What's your view on the viability of that, the extent to which the Beacon has sought public funding? What do you think?
Well, I can tell you right now, we have sought $0 in public funding. We didn't take PPP when that was available. That was something that I made a judgment call on during the pandemic, that we didn't need that as much as other folks needed it in the moment. Our board of directors hasn't made a policy around this. I can talk about what I personally think about that. Without getting into details about specific proposals, I'm very reticent to take government funding to support journalism. I think that if, for example, a lot of media had been dependent on government funding during, for example, maybe the Trump administration, that would be, not awesome for a lot of media. I would worry about the independent whims of whoever was in power to make those decisions on, who gets funding and who doesn't. And I would be really concerned about what that looks like if media overly relied on government funding. Over time, we all know there's programs that get funded in government every day, and there's programs that don't get funded, things that people need, and there's a lot of different arguments on that. And my concern is over reliance on that mechanism. I would much more likely place my bets on crowdfunding and diversified revenue from philanthropy, from individuals, from very selective corporate partners that we know align with us and are not going, not putting out things like climate change doesn't exist. Like, we're not going to put a corporate partnership message out on our website that says that, because that's not true. So those sort of things, I would much rather place my bets on diversified revenue to support media than to have essentially state-sponsored media. But that's my personal opinion, and is not the organization's opinion, since our board has not considered a policy on that.
And I got a question. It says Renee. I bet it's Richard there, I guess, in Conover.
You were talking about the decline in local news. Do you feel that some of the quality investigative journalism that has led to sort of disintegrated and turned into police blotter for the most part is part of the problem with where we have mass incarceration issues now?
There's a lot of issues with mass incarceration, but I can talk about police blotter and that kind of editorial stance. Thank goodness there's been a lot more conversation in local media about, not just running mugshots of folks all the time, especially before they've actually been found guilty of things that we write about. I've never been a fan of police blotter personally myself, for that very reason, in that it's, we should have an innocent until proven guilty model. But, also it's about sourcing, right? Like, if you're a good journalist, you're going to talk to folks who are on, like maybe for example, for criminal justice, you're not just talking to the police about a police shooting, you're talking to the family of the folks, who were shot, or people who were actually there. And a lot of times we're not getting that in our local, kind of crime news. So that's a problem. Also, just painting broad stripes for communities that may have higher crime levels. So there's a lot of problems with criminal justice reporting on the local level. It's a giant, you could write a whole thesis on the problems of how media portrays crime news on the local level, frankly. And I think that, that's one reason at the Beacon we've chosen not to do like daily crime news. We're more interested in systemic issues. We've written about like the lack of local control for the Kansas City police and things like that. that's more of interest to us and our readers at the moment versus, there was a shooting over here today, or there was, a robbery over here today, and that kind of thing. I think a lot of different people have a lot of thoughts on that. I will tell you that in a for-profit, ad-driven model, those are the stories that get a lot of clicks, right? And so it perpetuates them continuing to do those kinds of stories because it brings in ad revenue. So that's where we get into the perversion of the news model in particular. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I tried to.
Nathan has a question.
Hi, yeah, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and I really am grateful that you guys are out there, and there's the Independent in Missouri and Frontier in Oklahoma, and I wanted to try to ask something about sort of amateur citizen journalism, kind of being a stopgap, and your view on that. But I guess more broadly, I mean, being nonprofit, you have a greater potential maybe to partner with other organizations rather than be in competition with them. And just curious where you see that kind of coming together, or
Yeah.
do you have any comments on that?
Oh, I do. When I worked in newspapers, it was like fiercely competitive, even within newsrooms, which is not a very helpful environment when there's so few journalists, right? Like we can't afford to be so competitive. We need to be working with each other. And so, we're members of the KC Media Collective, which includes KCPT Flatland, KCUR, Startland News, Missouri Business Alert, and American Public Square. And so we're all, working right now, literally on a project that we're all collaboratively, working on right now on climate change. That's a topic that we're collaboratively reporting and producing stories on, or planning to closer to Earth Day. So that's just one example. But that's something that I think all of these organizations have really bought into, and we agree on that. At this time, like, we really can't be competitive. We have to work together across the news ecosystem, and not be redundant either. Like, we never want to write a story that KCUR or another outlet has written exactly. We always want to bring something new to the table. So if it's a topic that's been covered a lot, we want to show a new angle, or to bring a new set of data, to kind of help folks get a bigger picture. In terms of what you're talking about, like with amateur journalists, so I have kind of different feelings about it. On the one hand, like, the ethics that we learn as professional journalists on the job through this training is really important. And so that would be something that I would hope that folks who maybe don't have any background in journalism would learn, because it's important that we all have sort of similar values and guideposts. Like, for example, I really hate anonymity. I'm like, put your money where your mouth is, put your name on what you write. You build your credibility, that kind of thing. So that's something, like, personally, that I think is very important as a journalist, along with, not contributing to political campaigns. So that's something that, I would want to see shared values around independent journalism and amateur journalism or citizen journalism. There are some really interesting models similar to the Community Engagement Bureau that, we've been in talks with others about. There's an organization in Chicago, kind of similar to the Beacon, called City Bureau, and they call themselves a journalism lab, and they have what's called the Documenters program, and we've been in talks with them about how we could bring that to Kansas City and to Wichita. The Documenters program specifically trains members of the public. I prefer members of the public to citizens, because I think citizens can have kind of a loaded connotation with certain people, but they train members of the public on how to attend government meetings on the local level. They help them understand, what's allowed in public or closed session, help them understand open meetings and records laws, and then, help bring all of that information that they gather at these meetings together into one place, and then work with journalists on what are the bigger picture stories maybe coming out of those meetings. Because there's just not enough journalists to go to all the meetings anymore. There's just not. So we need to help train kind of that next generation of folks, or find people in the public who have the time or ability to do that. They're also paying those folks, those documenters, to do that, which is, really important from an equity standpoint. So, I'm really keen on that model. That's something we really want to bring to Kansas City, and we've been talking to the folks at City Bureau on how we could possibly replicate something like that here on the local level.
Kelsey, this is Joe. I wanted to see, and the Kansas City Star now is like they have a regular pitch now for donations for their for-profit journalism. And I'm wondering about, you mentioned that there was an issue whether you be for-profit or nonprofit. I mean, are there hybrid versions out there? I mean, how do you mix? Can you mix advertising? How would you do that? Is there other ways to do this?
So first off, my thoughts and many other nonprofits' thoughts, because I'm on a lot of listservs and talk to a lot of my peers, we're very not big fans of for-profits, doing that, basically trying to take advantage of 501c3 pass-throughs. I can say that I have concerns about some of the legality around that, particularly since, the for-profits are using what's called a fiscal sponsor, which is an outside 501c3 to basically funnel donations that are tax deductible. And, when you have a fiscal sponsor, which, so you all know, the Beacon was fiscally sponsored for a period of time by the Kansas Newspaper Foundation, which is part of the Press Association, before we got our own 501c3. It's kind of a way of incubating 501c3s. When you have a fiscal sponsor, they need to be fiduciary, like they have a fiduciary responsibility for the organization that they're sponsoring. And my concern with a lot of these for-profits that are using this mechanism is that there's no fiscal oversight by the fiscal sponsor. They're simply using it as a pass-through for donations. And that is not, that's a big no-no with the IRS. So like when we had a fiscal sponsor, they could see our bank accounts, they could see, where we were spending money, they could make sure that we were, spending money properly, because we were basically using their 501c3 status. And that's a big concern that I have about some of these for-profits using this, is that they're just using it as a way to market and to funnel money into a failing business model. And a lot of folks don't understand some of these nuances in having a fiscal sponsor and how this works. So that's a big concern of mine. We know also that there's a difference between corporate partnerships and advertising. With ads, a lot of times the ads you see on newspapers are like miracle weight loss pills or whatever. And these are things that are being bought on a national level and then just filtered into all of the local websites. So if you have a national like hedge fund owned newspaper company, they will buy these like crappy ads, like things that aren't even real, sometimes like miracle weight loss pills, and then they'll funnel them onto all of their local sites. When I was a healthcare reporter, this was especially cringy for me because there was a lot of like the miracle weight loss ads and things like that, these drugs or whatever, that weren't real, that would show up on my very carefully researched health articles, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Like you've gotten bad info, bad ads on a page where you're trying to put credible health information out there. So for us, looking at what corporate partnerships can be, is it could be, less about the entity. Maybe a law firm wants to be a corporate partner with us. Maybe they're gonna be a sponsor for an event, but they don't get to say like what the event is, right? Like they're not gonna tell us what we can write about or anything like that. But they're supporting our overall mission, right? Like, and we're not gonna run like miracle weight loss pill ads on our site. Like that is a difference, I think, between advertising and corporate partnerships, is you're finding organizations that maybe align with you on a broader sense versus the individual messaging that you're just filling on a page.
I mean, do you anticipate that there might be a time when a corporate sponsor, maybe they share your mission, but then maybe they do have some expectation? I mean, or maybe that's already happened. Or if that were to happen, how do you anticipate trying to navigate that balance?
Yeah. So we don't have corporate partnerships yet. That's something we're actually literally adding in the next few months. But that's going to be part of our job, right? Is to create some of those policies, right? If somebody comes to us with they want to be a corporate partner, but they want to put a big old banner out on our website that says climate change doesn't exist. That's going to be a no. That's going to be a hard no from us. Like, thanks, but no thanks. Like, you know, so, I mean, we're going to have to create policies that are guardians of our editorial independence. And if folks, you know, don't want that, then we don't have to take their money, and they don't have to come to us. They can find another outlet for their money. So I guess that's something that we have to, you know, create our own policies. But again, there's a lot of really good policies that other nonprofit news organizations have created that we can look to for guidance.
And another thought now, there was a talk a little bit ago about collaborating with amateur journalists or citizen journalists. I mean, now, I don't know what your experience has been. My experience has been that the community, the amateur journalists, they're almost inevitably an advocate for something. The journalists, they're willing to sit down and do the work, whether there's a story there or not. The advocate, the citizen journalist, is got something they're very interested in. And so how would you mold those together?
That's a good question. You know, and I get a question a lot about, like, isn't journalism advocacy? And I think about that a lot, right? That's something that we're always kind of thinking about. And to me, you're right, Joe. The difference is, do we have a preordained solution, right? Like, when you're an advocate, you already think you know what the solution is. And for me as a journalist, we may end up in the same place. Like, the story may end up highlighting the exact same solution that an advocate would highlight. But for us, it's the process, right? It's how we get there. It's who we talk to. It's the information we gather. And that's what journalism is. It's a process. And so that's how I kind of think about those things. And so if we were to ever, like, partner with a public member of the public who's, you know, freelancing or something like that, I want to know their process. I want to know how they got there. And then also they need to disclose conflicts of interest, right? Like, so if they work for an organization that promotes this, like, that's going to be probably a pass for us on doing that, because that's a conflict of interest from them. So but if, you know, if they're willing to go through the process, they're willing to be fair to folks and go through this process of journalism, then that's something that we would be happy to do and to support.
Alice, you have a question.
Yes, I'm worried about the young people and how they get their information. I'm an adjunct at UMKC in social work. I always ask my students how they get their information. They do not read newspapers. Some barely read or watch television. And so everything is on the internet. And I say, well, how do you know what you're getting is accurate? So how can we get them to connect on internet with you? Why would they do it when it's not in their path of awareness?
Well, we're on all the social media channels, you know, Instagram. We don't have an active TikTok, but we're thinking about what we should do with TikTok. That TikTok is quite the puzzle to do. But that's something that we're thinking about. You know, we're on the social media channels and all of that. But one thing that's been really really cool for me, and we don't like gather a whole lot of information on our readers, but we have, you know, some basic analytics. Our primary website readers, the top two age demographics are 25 to 35 and 35 to 45. And so that's a solid millennial audience for us, and gives us a lot of room to grow into other audiences too. So I know 25 isn't as young as a lot of the college students probably that you have at UMKC, but for me, it gives me a lot of hope that there are folks who are younger and who want to be engaged, and they want smart journalism, and they want local journalism, and that we're connecting with those folks. Our audience also tends to skew slightly female, which I think is interesting as well. So so that's just some of the information that we know about our readers, and that makes me very happy and hopeful personally about the future of news. So.
Hey, Michael's got a question.
Yeah, thanks. I was disheartened to hear you say a few moments ago that you felt there just weren't enough reporters in general and with your organization to routinely attend various government meetings and cover those kinds of sort of more routine events. I think when the Star was more functional, it would have reporters whose beat was, you know, City Hall or the school district. And over a period of years, they would develop contacts and understanding and expertise and perspective that would let them write, better stories, frankly. So did I hear you right to say that you don't really envision that as part of the Beacon's future efforts to have somebody like dedicated reporters who will, have these kind of beats in the traditional sense?
Oh, no. We have traditional beats. We have a healthcare reporter, a local government reporter, things like that. But Kansas City has 117 jurisdictions. I mean, the Star never attended all the meetings. They never did. They attended lots of meetings. They had bureaus, they had more reporters on the ground, they had more freelancers, but no one has ever attended all the meetings all the time. And I think that the documenters model out of Chicago is something that I'm really keen on, eventually bringing here, to where, again, we probably won't be able to go to all 117 jurisdictions in the Kansas City Metro's weekly or multi-weekly meetings for every single board and everything out there. But I think that is one way we can help address the lack of boots on the ground, frankly. And like I said, I'm just really keen on that model, because one, it just shows government that folks are watching, right? That there are people there who are keeping an eye on things, and that alone can, in my own experience, formerly as a city hall reporter, just knowing that there's a reporter in the room or someone who's watching can really affect what actually happens in a government meeting. And so that's something that's really important to me. Just even presence is a big deal. But you're right, like there were bureaus, there was more robust routine meeting coverage in the past. But those days are largely gone, unfortunately. And so you end up only finding out about things when they're already very late in the process, right? Like they've already gone through 5 committees, they've already gone through this, and then it's in front of city council. Well, maybe their decisions are already, decided before the public even hears about the issue. So, my ultimate goal would be for more people to find out about more information earlier in the process so that they can actually, help shape the outcome.
Thanks.
Yeah, we've been listening to Kelsey Ryan on the All Souls Community Forums, the publisher and the founder and publisher of the Beacon. Thank you for being here today, Kelsey, and everyone. Thank you very much. Good, and have a good day.
Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate you being here.